very good evening to you and welcome to Vantage Point, where we dissect the political situation here in Sri Lanka. And joining us this evening is none other than veteran political commentator Dr. Dayan Jayathilaka. A very good evening to you, Doctor, and welcome to the show.
Good evening, Kashan. Good to be here.
Doctor, let's talk about the elections or the lack of elections in Sri Lanka. What exactly is going on? There are promises being made on one hand by politicians that the elections are to be held this year, and then on the other hand we have the elections commissioner coming in saying that it is impossible to hold the elections this year and that it might get postponed once again to next year. What exactly is going on?
Well, the Commissioner of Elections or the chairman of the Elections Commission, former Commissioner of Elections, is really talking about two different elections, Krishan. The one that he says cannot be held this year, but he hopes to hold in January, are the local authorities elections, that's the local government elections, i.e. municipal councils, town councils, Pradeshya Sabhas, and so on. That's your municipal level. That's the one that he says cannot be held this year, but he almost certainly will hold it in January next year. Now there's another election which is a bigger one, bigger in many senses because it's to the provincial councils. And what the Commission of Elections says is that the government has moved the 20th Amendment. If the Supreme Court decides that the 20th Amendment needs a referendum, obviously the government will not go for a referendum on the 20th Amendment, which means that the government's attempt to have all the provincial elections on one day, i.e. to postpone the elections, will fall flat on its face, and therefore the commissioner will be triggering the electoral process. There are three councils that come up for re-election. One will stand dissolved on the 26th of September, this month, the other on the 27th, and the other on the 1st of October. And he hopes to call for nominations on the 2nd of October and hold elections on the 9th of January. Now that is what Mahinda Deshapriya said on the record. Now this was followed up by credible reports in the quality media, which said that the Supreme Court has handed in its judgment on the 14th of September, and the government knows what it is, and therefore we shall be having a three-cornered fight at the provincial level this year, in December. That report was followed up by yet another one, which said that Prime Minister Wickremesinghe had given instructions to the Secretary of the United National Party, Minister Kabir Hashim, that the Supreme Court ruling is not in favor of the government, that they won't be able to postpone, so the UNP has to be geared for elections in November, December this year, right? So far, so good. But now we have mixed signals, which is what is distressing. The newer reports were that the leaders, the two top leaders of the government, had told their MPs and their provincial councillors, hey guys, don't worry, the elections, all future elections, including these ones, that's the provincial council elections, the ones that were to be held on the 9th of December, these elections and all future elections will be held under a new electoral system of the first past the post or mixed system. And then you have government ministers such as Dilan Pereira coming out and saying, look, the proportional representation system is a very bad one, we are going to bring in a mixed system. What's wrong with the Commission of Elections? Here we are trying to bring this in, and he wants to have elections under proportional representation. Now the problem, Krishan, is why now? I mean, let us grant, for the sake of argument, though it's very difficult for me as a political scientist to do so, but let me grant for the sake of argument that the PR system is a bad one and first past the post is better, or that a mixed system would be better and should be tried out. All right. But the question is, why wait, why try to postpone the provincial council elections through the 20th Amendment?
Talking about postponing elections, Doctor, through the 20th Amendment, I'm sure many people, the general public, are of the opinion that all these attempts made to postpone the election by the government is because the government is afraid to face the election.
Well, I would assume so. I mean, logically, yes.
Okay, but they say that they are much better than the previous administration and that they are fighting corruption, they are fulfilling the many promises that they made in the run-up to the presidential and the parliamentary elections. So, if the government is fulfilling their promises made, why are they afraid to face the people?
Because they know better. Krishan, during my time in and around the political process, the two personalities who have been accused most often of being autocratic or dictatorial, if not downright tyrannical, have been from the UNP, President Ranasinghe Premadasa, and from the SLFP, President Mahinda Rajapaksa. Premadasa and Mahinda, tough guys, strong men, quasi-dictators. Now, those two allegedly tyrannical presidents are the guys on whose watch you never postponed elections. There was not one election that was postponed. They were election crazy. Premadasa had elections on schedule. If anybody challenged him, such as the DUNF, Lalita Atula and so on, what Premadasa used to do was, yeah, let me get you at elections. And he waits for the first possible election and has the election. The same with Mahinda Rajapaksa. Mahinda Rajapaksa used to have elections prematurely. In fact, he lost on a, but he'd done that before and he'd won. Now, the two tyrants, so-called, used to have elections on schedule. Why are these guys running scared of elections?
Do you think that they are afraid that the same fate that faced the former president will come upon them once again?
No, I think they know that if they have, for instance, one of the scheduled elections is in the North Central Province, that if they have elections to the NCP Provincial Council, they're going to lose. And if they lose, what does it do to, for instance, Mr. Duminda Dissanayake, the secretary of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, whose base is Anuradhapura?
But the NCP is the constituency of the president himself.
That too. So they're caught, because either they have elections now and lose, or they postpone elections to next year and lose worse. Because I've never known any government in Sri Lanka which has postponed elections and benefited from it. Every single government, and the SLFP and the UNP have both done this, as I said, with the exceptions of Premadasa and Mahinda Rajapaksa. Every government that postponed an election paid for it. It's like taking a loan. You buy time, but you pay with interest in votes, because people know that you're on a downswing. That's why you're postponing elections. And you're in fact more unpopular later than now. At least if you have elections now, you take the hit and you can correct yourself. You have another 2.5 years to go. But if you postpone elections till the middle of next year or late next year, which is what Prime Minister Wickremesinghe wanted to do with the 20th Amendment. He wanted to kick the can down the road, as he usually does, except on economic issues, way into next year. Now, if you do that, that's only 1 year. 2018 is 1 year away from the presidential election of late 2019. The mood is one of anti-incumbency. So it's really not very smart for any government to postpone elections, and in fact be seen to postpone elections, because you move the 20th Amendment because you want to postpone it by clustering all the elections on one day and pushing it to 2019 or 2018. Then the provincial councils start voting against you, which is what happened in Uber and so So then somebody moves the Supreme Court and says this is bad. The Supreme Court strikes it down. And then you will lose your gamble to postpone the elections quite blatantly. Then what do? You say, hey, excuse me, I want to have this according to this splendid new electoral system which I had forgotten for several years and not brought in. I mean, if I cared that much about it, I should have brought it in time for this election. But I try to postpone it, I can't postpone it, then I try to postpone it again by backdoor amendments to the electoral system. Now, the people aren't stupid. People have been voting in this country from 1931. They know when somebody's postponing elections and tries to postpone it, fails, and then tries some other route of postponing the elections. That only delegitimizes a government and it makes it less rather than more popular.
When will the elections be held? This year, next year, or even after that? We'll talk about it after this break. Welcome back. You're watching Vantage Point. Now, just before the break, we were speaking about the much anticipated elections that are being postponed. Doctor, the Supreme Court determined that a public referendum is needed for certain clauses to be passed for the 20th Amendment to be implemented. Now, this was determined by the Supreme Court just a few days ago. Do you think this is a victory or a defeat for the government?
Well, it's clearly a defeat because the government moved the 20th Amendment in order to cluster all the provincial council elections on one day, and the draft said that it should be a day no later than the dissolution of the last council. So, in other words, if somebody had to go for elections in 2017, they could stay on till the last provincial council had to be dissolved, that's 2019. And when it started losing support in various provincial councils because they too have to express their views on this. They started voting against it. There was turmoil in some councils. And then the Prime Minister said, verbally, he said, look, we'll try to move this to 2018, the middle of 2018. So the 20th Amendment was an attempt, very blatantly, to postpone the elections that are due this year, because the first council stands dissolved on the 26th of this month. And the chairman of the Elections Commission, Mr. Mahinda Deshapriya, a very independent public servant, made very clear that if the Supreme Court rules that there should be a referendum, the government obviously isn't going for a referendum. Therefore, he's going to activate the electoral process. The Constitution doesn't give him any other leeway. The council stand dissolved on the 26th, 27th of September and the 1st of October. He will call for nominations on the 2nd of October and he hopes to have elections on the 9th of December. Now, clearly, going by that, the Supreme Court judgment which was conveyed to the Speaker and through the Speaker to the Parliament as we speak is a defeat for the government and a defeat for the Prime Minister because he's the one whose idea it was. Now, this is the second time this has happened. The first time was with the 19th Amendment. The PM presented the 19th Amendment, which was intended to shift power from the President to the PM. It was challenged in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that quite a few of those clauses would require a referendum and kicked it back to Parliament. That's when President Sirisena took the ball and ran with it and said, look, everything that the Supreme Court says needs a referendum, we throw out. And let's work on the rest of it. And then he got a slimmed down 19th Amendment. The Prime Minister was unhappy. At the moment that it was passed, he made a speech and he said, this is just a temporary measure. We will move for a new constitution, transferring the powers of the President to the Prime Minister. So, the 19th Amendment was the first defeat. The 19th Amendment as presented by the PM, eventually slimmed down 19th Amendment was passed. But the original 19th Amendment was debated, was challenged in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that it was ultra vires the Constitution, certain sections. This is the second such defeat. Again, it's the PM. The 20th Amendment has pretty much been shot down by the Supreme Court, which means that according to our Constitution, elections must be held. But as I said, it's a little unseemly, the chatter from the highest quarters in government that, hey, not so fast, we are going to change the electoral system and have these elections on that new basis. Now, that is clearly in contravention of the spirit of the Supreme Court ruling. You try to postpone the elections. The Supreme Court says no, pretty much. I mean, go to the people for referendum. It's conveyed to the Speaker. The Speaker conveys it to Parliament. So now, any decent government should say, okay, we tried. The Supreme Court says no. We bow to the Supreme Court and we shall have the election on schedule, as the Chairman of the Commission of Elections said. Now, that's the right thing to do. But if you try to do something else, it means you're trying to subvert the judgment of the Supreme Court on this issue. So let's see how it plays out over the next few days. These are very dramatic days that we're living through, Krishan. It isn't usual that you have days of this sort in any country's political calendar, but this week is a very crucial week for the destiny of Sri Lanka.
We will be back after this short commercial break. Doctor, shifting gears a bit, but still staying on the topic of elections now. Earlier this week, again, President Maithripala Sirisena had said that come the next provincial council election and the next parliamentary election, that it will be held under the first past the post system, and that he's committed and dedicated towards ensuring that the upcoming elections are held under this new system. I'm sure that words such as the first past the post system and proportional representation are quite new and foreign to many of our listeners. Would you mind just explaining briefly just what exactly this is? And they're talking about bringing a mixed system. What exactly it is about, the new system?
Well, Krishan, I approach this as a political scientist, and when I do so, let me tell you what I see. What I see is that in the United States of America, President Trump lost the popular vote. Hillary Clinton actually won the popular vote. But Donald Trump is the president and Hillary Clinton is not. Now, in Sri Lanka, that could not have happened. And believe it or not, that's because our political system is slightly superior. Our presidential system is modeled on the French system, and we don't have an electoral college. What we have is a directly elected presidency, and all elections are on the basis of proportional representation, which means that it's an accurate mirror of the different trends of opinion, schools of thought in our diverse society. Let us take the British elections. Theresa May is hanging on to power by a thread. Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party did very well. Theresa May has had to cobble together a coalition together with the ultra-right-wing Protestants of Northern Ireland. But in terms of actual votes, Theresa May got over 1 million votes, or maybe slightly less, but
quite a huge margin.
Margin. She won by a huge margin. Except in Parliament, it wasn't even sure that she could form a government. That's because of the first past the post Westminster system. Now, I'm not convinced that that is the best system there is. The proportional representation system is a much more accurate reflector of what the people actually want. Because, I mean, if somebody gets 10%, it's reflected. So, I'm not very convinced about this critique of proportional representation. I think it's by far a better system. Now, certain things have gone wrong with this system as it has worked out here. That is the system of preferential votes. The argument is that you have to indicate your preferences. I think that as a system, that's a better one than that which we had earlier, because earlier, Krishan, when President Jawaharlal introduced this system, it is the party leader who decided which one goes in. But now we indicate our preferences. As a system, that's better.
But the preferential system or the preferential vote system also has complaints against it, saying it's easy to buy the vote.
It's easy to buy the vote. Now, what do you do there? Look at our elections. There have been places such as Mathura, where Dala Salha Peruma contested, where they've been very clean elections. So it really has to do with the candidate. Now, of course, you have a great number of rascals who contest these elections. But what you have to do then, Krishan, is tighten the election law, not change the electoral system. I mean, look at the countries where you have PR, like Israel. Israel has PR. I mean, is there corruption? No, it's to do with the electoral, how you run the electoral system, make it a clean electoral system. You strengthen the Commissioner of Elections. In India, you have a very strong Commission of Elections. Strengthen our institutions, tighten the election laws, ban certain things, free up the police to be able to enforce those laws, and then the PR will work the way it's supposed to work. But you don't cut your nose to spite your face. So, as a political scientist, I am thoroughly unconvinced that the PR system and proportional representation are, as a system, inferior to this mixed system or the first past the post system they want to bring in. But let us, for the sake of argument, say that, okay, let's try this. The problem, Krishan, is that for 2.5 years they sat on it. If they believed in it, it was easy to do. Why was it easy to do? Because years ago, there was an all-parties parliamentary select committee headed up by Dinesh Gunawardena, and there was a report which gave the formula for a mixed electoral system. All they had to do was take that as they came in and implement it. Now, who's going to say no? Is the JO going to oppose Dinesh Gunawardena's select committee report? They can't. They'd be fools. I mean, they'd look stupid. So, what was the problem? The problem was that nobody wanted to. I mean, the SLFP wanted a new electoral system. The UNP didn't. Some of the minority parties didn't. The JVP wasn't sure. So, Ranil didn't move on that. That was to be the original 20th Amendment, by the way. The electoral system. When the 19th Amendment was passed by Parliament, President Sirisena promised that the 20th Amendment would be the next amendment and that it would be to reform the electoral system. Now, that was not done. Instead, you have a 20th Amendment which was about postponing the provincial council elections. And now that the Supreme Court has struck it down, if somebody says, hey, by the way, I've got that, you remember I was talking about that 20th Amendment to clean up the electoral system, I'm going to bring it now.
Doctor,
and that's only to postpone elections again.
If I'm to interrupt you there, from a third eye, from a third point of view, the current system in Sri Lanka, whether it's the elections, the whole political foray is in a utter mess. It's all tangled up. No one knows what exactly they're doing. And if I'm to use the vernacular language, I'm quite sure it would be right to say that the current situation is a proper maluma.
Or an acharu, if you
yes.
With the vernacular.
What we need to come out of this at some point of time. We need to, if you are to develop. Very briefly, could you be able to tell us how exactly we can untangle this knot and move forward as a nation?
Well, the first thing is respect the letter and spirit of the ruling of the Supreme Court and have the elections on the 9th of December. And don't delay the local government elections, have those elections. You need the steam to escape from the system, Krishan, because there are too many demonstrations, too many strikes. When people think that they cannot express their views at an election, then they hit the streets. We need them to get off the streets and back into the polling booth. So have the election first, then take the Dinesh Gunawardena report on electoral reform and just implement that, because it's a result of a select committee process. Everybody agrees with it. Do that cleanly. Don't allow people to suspect that you're trying to postpone elections by delimitation. Give it a strict timeline. Do it before your parliamentary elections. If you try to do it just before the parliamentary elections, people are going to suspect that you're trying to postpone that as well. And there's going to be blowback. So get these elections over with and bring that reform. Get all parties' support. It will pass just like the 19th Amendment passed. It can be done.
Unfortunately, our time for today is at an end, but when we do return in 2 weeks' time, we hope that our country would have made sufficient progress with regard to the elections, and we also hope that a proper date would have been determined where the elections would be held, because this is the expectation of the people of our country, and we must not forget that what needs to be done is the expectation of the people, the general public, and not the politicians, because the politicians are only appointed by the people to serve them. Well, with that thought, we wrap up Vantage Point for tonight. It was a pleasure having you with us. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time, same time, same place. Until then, good night.